Good morning, grade 10s. I hope you guys are all well and that you had a good day off yesterday. We are finished with parabolas. So far we've done the straight line graph and we've done the quadratic graph, which is a parabola. And today we are going to start with a hyperbola. It's a completely new graph to you, so I'm going to do a bit of intro. You will see from your notes, which you please need to read through before you watch the video. You will see the shape of the graph, but I'm just going to go through the effects of A and Q and how to actually draw this graph. So please go through the notes first, make notes in your book, and then watch the video. Just to recap, the standard form of a hyperbola is y is equal to a over x plus q. And just to remind you what the values of a and q mean, your a determines whether the graph is positive or negative. It also determines the steepness of the graph. And your q is your vertical shift, so how many positions the graph shifts up or down. Looking at the effect of a hyperbola is made up by two curves which do not touch each other. If your A is positive, it means that your curves will be in quadrant 1 and quadrant 3. But if your A is negative, it means that your graph will fall in quadrant 2 and quadrant 4. Next, we look at the effects of Q, and just like a straight line graph and a parabola, the Q value is your vertical shift. So this tells you how many positions the graph moves up or down. Now, if the Q value is 0, it means that the graph is in its original position. It has not shifted. But if the Q value is, for example, a +1 or a -3, it means that the graph has moved up 1 position or down 3 positions. Now, for a hyperbola, the Q value is represented by an asymptote. Now, an asymptote is, in this case, a dotted line, and it will be horizontal because it represents how many places the graph has moved up or down. An asymptote is a line that the graph will come really close to, but it will never intersect. It will never cut the asymptote. Okay, and then like I said, the asymptote shows how many positions the graph has moved up or down. And when a graph is given of a hyperbola, they will tell you the equation of the asymptote. So they will say where the dotted line is, they'll say y is equal to 3. And then you would know that the graph has moved up 3 positions. Or they would say y is equal to -4. And then you would know the graph has moved down 4 positions. But it's very important to remember that your asymptote is your Q value. So when we start drawing our hyperbolas, you're going to see that your asymptote actually is the Q value, and it tells you how many positions the graph moves up or down. As you would have seen from the notes, we are going to be using the table method to draw our hyperbola, but it's not as easy as just putting in -3, -2, -1, 0, 1, 2, 3. You actually need to decide what x values you're going to use. And the value of a is going to determine your x value. So if you look at the example I've said, if a is 6, then you're going to use your factors of 6, the positive and the negative. So for example, 6, 3, 2, 1, -1, -2, -3, and -6. Now the reason we use the positive and the negative is because remember that 2 times 3 is 6, but -2 times -3 is also 6. Another one that I've done is the factors of 10 would be 5, 2, 10, and 1, but also the negative ones. And then the third one that I did there, if your A value is 3, you would also use 3, 1, -1, and -3. So it would be your positive and your negative values. If it was -3, you would use the same, because 3 times -1 gives you -3, and 1 times -3 gives you -3. So you would also use the positive and negative values if your A value was negative. Now I'm just going to quickly recap step for step how to actually draw this parabola. So your first thing would be you would set up your table. You would then choose your x values. Remember, your A is going to determine your x values. So you're going to choose your A values. Once you have chosen them, you're going to use your calculator to find your y values. So you're going to plug it into the calculator and they will give you the y values. From there, you're going to look at what your Q value is. That will tell you where you're going to draw your asymptote. So your asymptote you're going to draw as a dotted line, and it will be a horizontal line that you would draw at whatever the value of Q is. Then you're going to check your A value, and if your A value is positive, remember your points should be in quadrant 1 and 3. And if your A value is negative, your point should be in quadrant 2 and 4. So you're just going to double check your points that they fall in the correct quadrants. Once you've checked that, you're actually going to plot your coordinates, and you should see that when you have joined your coordinates, it should be two separate curves that do not touch each other, and they should also not touch the asymptote. Once you have plotted them and joined them, you're going to make a nice smooth curve, no straight points, a nice smooth curve, and your last step will then be to actually label your graph. I'm going to do two examples with you. So the first one says that the f of x, or you can say y, is equal to 4 over x plus 1. Now there's two things I want you to notice. First of all, your a value is 4, which means your graph is going to be quite a bit steeper. Secondly, you should notice that a is positive, so we're going to be working in quadrant 1 and 3. Second thing I want you to notice is that it's plus 1, which means your graph should shift up one position, which means that your asymptote is going to be drawn at y is equal to 1. For number B, I want you to notice you've got f of x is equal to negative 5 over x. That a value is negative 5. And all I want you to see is that obviously because it's 5, your graph is going to be a bit steeper. And secondly, I want you to see it is negative, which means we will work in quadrant 2 and 4. Okay, grade 10, so I'm going to do two examples with you. The first one says the f of x is equal to 4 over x plus 1. So you can see I've already set up my table there, and I've chosen my x values being my factors of 4. So I've said negative 4, negative 2, negative 1, 1, 2, and 4. Okay, so now I'm going to use my my calculator to work out my table method. And there's just something I want you to notice here. So I'm going to say the f of x is equal to fraction button. At the top I've got 4, and at the bottom I'm going to say alpha close bracket, which gives me my x, and then I'm going to go to the side plus 1. Okay, so there is my function, equals my starting point. I'm going to say negative 4. My ending point, I'm going to say positive 4. Reason being is you can see it goes from negative 4 to positive 4. I know it doesn't include all of them like negative 3 and 0, but I'm going to get to that in a minute. So my starting point is negative 4 and positive 4 equals, and then my intervals I'm still going to keep as 1. But now I'm only going to use the ones that I've chosen. They give me all of them, but I'm only going to use the ones that I have chosen. So negative 4 and 0. I'm going to skip negative 3. I'm going to go to you can't see there. I'm going to go to negative 2, which is negative 2 and negative 1. I'm going to skip. You can see there. Where am I? So negative 4 and 0, which I've done. Negative 3 I'm skipping, negative 2 and negative 1. Then it goes negative 1 and negative 3. Then goes 0. I'm skipping. You can see it's an error because the graph doesn't cut the x-axis. Then the next one is 1 and 5. I'm going to go 2 and 3. And then I'm skipping 3. Moving on to 4, which is 4 and 2. Okay, so now I have my coordinates, and from there I'm going to draw my hyperbola. The first thing I'm going to do before I draw my hyperbola is I'm going to put in my asymptote, and we can see that my q value is positive 1, which means my asymptote is there. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to draw a dotted line, and I'm going to label it y is equal to 1. and that is my asymptote. Remember, it's a line that the graph can never touch. I'm then going to plot my points. So I've got -4 and 0, which is here. I've got -2 and -1, which is there. I've got -1 and -3, which is there. Then I'm going to go +1 and 5, which is there. 2 and 3, which is there. And 4 and 2, which is there. Now, before I actually draw these lines, I want to first check something. My A value is +4, which means my graph should fall in quadrant 1 and 3, and it does, so I know I'm right. So now when I draw this graph, remember this is my asymptote. The graph will get close to it, but it will never cut it, and this is my other asymptote, but we're going to learn more about that next year. So the graph will get really close to the y-axis but not touch. So I'm going to join those points. You can see it can carry on going down, but it will never touch this line. And yeah, you can see it will carry on, but it will never touch the y-axis. And same this side, can go down really close but never touch. And then same thing there, can go really close but not touch. And there I've drawn my hyperbola. I would now label it y is equal to 4/x plus 1, or you could label it the f of x is equal to 4/x plus 1. So just a few things to notice. My A value determines that it is in quadrant 1 and 3 because it's positive. Second thing is my vertical shift is at 1. My asymptote is drawn at 1, which means the graph has shifted up 1 unit, and you can see it never will cut that asymptote. Okay, moving on to the second example. It says there that the f of x is equal to -5/x. And just a few things to notice. First of all, there's no vertical shift, so there's no asymptote. The asymptote will actually be the x-axis, but there's no shift up or down. Second thing you should notice is that your A value is -5, which means that we're going to be working in quadrant 2 and 3. So I'm going to, in my table, you can see I've already chosen my x values, and I've chosen the factors of 5, -5, -1, 1, and -5. So I've got my table mode on my calculator. F of x is equal to fraction button at the top -5 over at the bottom alpha close bracket, which is x, equals. I'm going to start at -5. I'm going to end at +5. I'm still going to go in intervals of 1, but I'm only going to use what I need. Okay, so you can see you've got -5 and +1. I'm not going to use -4. I'm not going to use -3. I'm not going to use -2, but I've got -1 and 5. I'm not going to use 0. I'm going to use 1 and -5. I'm not going to use 2 or 3 or 4, but I am going to use 5, which gives me -1. Okay, so there I've got my values in my table, and now I'm going to plot my points. Okay, so what we would have done is we would have put in our asymptote, but like I said earlier, there is no vertical asymptote in this case. So I'm going to start with my coordinates. So I've got -5 and 1, which is there. And I've got -1 and +5, which is there. Okay, then I'm going to use the +1. So I've got +1 and -5, which is there. And I've got 5 and -1, which is there. Now, just a couple of things before I actually draw this. If you didn't know better, you would just make that a straight line. But you should know that you're working with a hyperbola, so it should be a curve. So what you could have done, we could have used one of the other points. We could have used maybe, you know, the points at -2 and at positive 2 just to give us a bit of guidance as to the steepness of this graph. I chose not to do that, but if you want a bit more detail, you can do that. But from the prior knowledge, you should know that your graph needs to be a curve, like that. And same thing here, it should be a curve. Okay, from there, just to note that your A value was negative, so it should fall in quadrant 2 and 4. It has, so you know that it's in the correct quadrants. There was no vertical shift, so that would be the end of it. If you wanted to use more detail, you could have, but there you have the graph. And your last thing would be to label it. So you would say the f of x or y is equal to negative 5 over x. And there you have labeled your graph. All right, grade 10s, that brings us to the end of our lesson for today. For homework, there are 2 activities and 2 questions from each activity. It is slightly more than what you have been getting, but please take into account that yesterday you had no maths or no homework, and also that tomorrow's activity will be quite a bit shorter. So for today in your textbook, exercise 12, page 155, question 2 and 3, and exercise 13 on page 159, also question 2 and 3. Once you've done the first one, you will see it is quite repetitive. You're doing the same thing again. And like I said, it is the table method, but please do take note of the value of the effects of A and Q. If you guys have any problems or if you're stuck, please contact your teacher. We are waiting for you guys to message us so that we can help you. I hope you have a good afternoon and take care of yourselves.